morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brittany DeFilly. I'm the Educational and Outreach Coordinator here at Vertex. Today we have Steve Hall, one of our senior engineers, and he's going to be going over Mitel Connect groups. So he'll hit on hunt groups, work groups, kind of the different terminologies and what they all do for you guys. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Steve. Steve, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Brittany, and welcome everybody to this month's webinar. Thank you for joining. And yeah, as Brittany said, this month we're going to cover some of the different groups that are involved in the MyVoice Connect system. A little bit of a kind of disambiguation, the term Wikipedia likes to use for these terms. There's a lot of different groups in here, and we've had some tickets, we've had a few questions that have come up, and thought it'd be a good opportunity just to clear that up. You know, a lot of times if you've got some turnover in the company and a new hire comes on, and you know, somebody says, "Hey, add Joe to the sales group in the phone system." Sometimes we need to clarify exactly what they mean by that, because there are a lot of different types of groups. So today we're going to talk you know, about all these different types of groups. So for example, we've got page groups, pickup groups, hunt groups, work groups, user groups, trunk groups as well. So a lot of things have the word group on it. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. So let me bring over my director webpage. All right, and of course, you know, here's a director. This is the page that you land on when you first log into the system. Anytime I'm working on anybody's system, including my own, I like to just take a second when I log in, take a glance across the top, make sure things look green here. You know, maybe even come down here to the status pages and take a peek at all the appliances that make up my system, just so I can be aware that everything is green and happy. Oh, I got a yellow here. I can see I got some phones unplugged. No big deal. There's always a couple phones that got unplugged somewhere in somebody's office. So then we can move on. So the first type of group I'd like to talk to you guys about today is page groups. So paging, when people talk about paging, there's a couple different methods that we can get that done. There's overhead paging and there's group paging. So overhead paging is we can connect some kind of third-party system to your phone system with overhead speakers that are horns for outside areas, and you can make a page to that. There's several different styles of paging groups. There's some where, you know, it's just a single zone page, so you call that extension on the system, and you are now speaking over, you know, all the speakers in the building. There's other systems where you call into that paging system, and then you have to press a certain key for whatever, you know, zone you want to page. Maybe you have a zone for outside, a zone for the gym if it's a school or something. But that's overhead paging, and that's going to be some third-party system that's connected to the system. Today we're going to talk about the page groups, which is when you basically send a page over your Mitel handsets, over the speakerphone of you know, your telephones in the system. And so we're going to come over here to the wrench icon. And if you don't know where something is, of course, you can type in up here at the top with the search field. And as you see, when we type in group, we have all sorts of hits on that term because there's all sorts of groups in the system. But I can see we've got paging groups here. So we can select that. After we select it, it does actually let us know kind of how we got here. So we can see that that's buried under features, call control, and page groups. So when we're talking about page groups, a couple things to keep in mind. There is kind of some bandwidth concerns with page groups that you should be aware of. The guideline is that if you're on a local network, you know, typical modern network is gigabit connections, and you know, everything's pretty quick on the LAN if you're not talking about multiple sites. And so if we're talking about a single site, you can go up to 100 phones is the guideline on that. Because when you do make a page, what's happening is the person making the page is one call to the server. They're calling their Mitel HQ server, and they're recording a message. Then the Mitel HQ server is calling 100 telephones, if that's how many people you have in your page group, and playing that recording. So that's 100 simultaneous calls going out across the network, and that's where the bandwidth concerns can come in. So 100 is the recommended max for that. If you have a page group that spans some WAN links, VPN or MPLS or whatever sort of links you have between your sites, then you really need to think about the kind of bandwidth you have available on those links to determine how many people you want to put in those page groups. Unless at that remote site you have an additional Windows server, a DVS, that's part of your Mitel system, because you can host the page group on that DVS, and therefore it would be fine to have a page group at the remote site with 100 users if the page group was hosted at the remote server. So if we take a look at a page group, there's really not a whole lot to look at here. Just take a look at the test group here. So you give it a name and extension like everything else in the system. Here's where we choose what server that it's going to live off of. We've got our HQ server called cDirector here. You can also have this come from the Linux DVS servers. So that might be a little bit easier for the multi-site environment to have a Linux DVS instead of a Windows DVS out there. Basically, every extension in the system has a couple of checkboxes here for whether or not you want to include it in the system dial by name directory. Wouldn't really make sense to have a page group in there because page group extensions are not actually accessible to outside callers. So even if they knew the extension, they wouldn't be able to reach it. But the system dial by name directory is, when you're in an auto attendant, if we give the option for the caller to, press a digit to search the name directory, do we want this extension to be, to come up in the search results? So it doesn't really make any sense to have that there. Make extension private. This basically blanks it out of the contacts for the Mitel Connect client users. When they search for something in there, do you want them to be able to see this extension in there? So by checking that, that will take it out of that group. We do have one option that affects how the page works here that's kind of important, is enable priority paging. So typically if I do a page and I don't enable priority paging, if a phone is idle, the audio is going to come out via the speakerphone on that phone. And if the phone is in use, someone's on a call, that page is going to come in as a second call appearance. It's going to ring as if they're getting a call, and that person could have the choice to reach over and press it to listen to the recording or not. With priority paging, we can interrupt that call that they might be on and go ahead and deliver that page via the speakerphone or whatever the active audio path is. So again, if they're already on their handset or on their headset and we enable priority paging, then it's going to interrupt that call, play them that page, and then then they'll be still on the call that they were on previously to continue. But that's what priority paging is. So if you need to make sure it's a high priority thing that gets delivered, then you can choose that option. No answer number of rings comes into play again if we're talking about not priority paging, right? So I said that the call comes in as a second call appearance. How long are they going to have to be able to choose to answer that call before it goes away? So in this case, that's set to 2 rings. And I'm going to skip the extension list. We're going to circle right back to that. But then first, I want to just talk about the group paging synchronization delay. Depending on how many phones you have in the page group, it's a good idea to increase that paging synchronization delay. So essentially what that is because we're talking about an Ethernet network and certain segments may be just a little bit slower than others, we want to make sure that there's a chance for all of the phones to answer that page and then play the recording simultaneously. Because what happens is if you have phones that are kind of within earshot of each other and the page is played a little bit out of sync, it sounds very echoey. It can even be hard to understand a little bit. So by increasing that paging synchronization delay, we can ensure that all the phones have a chance to join in there. And so you might want to increase that for, maybe a second for every 10 phones or so. There's not really a good guideline on that. It's just sort of depends on the nature of the network and what your experience is with that page group. But that's what the paging synchronization delay is for. And then we're going to circle back to the extension list. So the extension list is what phones are we going to page? And so there's a link here to view the extension list. So I'm going to click that, and that's going to take us, oh yeah, doesn't matter about the changes there. And this brings us to our list of extension lists. And the one we had selected there was VP because it's got one of our employees here, Brian Picard. Many of you probably know him in this list. So now his phone is the only one that's going to hear the page for this particular page group. Real easy to take people and put them into this page group. Just move somebody over, add Brittany in there, save it. Now we've got 3 people in this page group that are going to hear the page. Again, it's the extension list called BP, which is tied to the paging group called test page, as we can see here on this page. The extension lists actually get used in various parts of the system and can be reused. So again, like I said at the beginning of the webinar, if you got that new employee, Joe, that needs to be in the sales group, maybe there's a sales paging group, maybe there's a sales pickup group. If there's a sales extension list that we add Joe to, then that same extension list may be used by both the paging group and the pickup group. So that could accomplish both of those things with one change in director. So that's essentially it for the paging groups. So now I'm going to move on to pickup groups. Pickup groups on the screen here, there's again even less options here to a pickup group. Pickup group allows a call that's ringing on one phone to be answered by someone on another phone as long as they're a member of that same pickup group. So this is really useful if you've got kind of a close proximity phones, a group of people that work together. One person steps away from their desk and their phone rings, and someone else can reach over and pick up that call so that it doesn't go to voicemail or whatever. So when we create a pickup group, again, like everything else, we're going to give it a name and an extension in the system. Pickup groups live on voice switches. So because they live on the voice switches and not on the servers, there are some capacities and limits to be aware of. Voice switches do have, somewhat limited capacity when it comes to, memory and CPU resources. The guidelines on that is that any pickup group can have up to 24 members, and you can have up to 16 pickup groups potentially on a switch, and you could have up to 80 pickup group members. So a combination of those 16 pickup groups with, some members in each one, as long as you don't exceed 80 total pickup group members on a switch. But that's only talking about pickup groups. There's other things that can actually consume resources on a switch, hunt groups being one of the most common, and those things actually work in conjunction with each other. And unfortunately, the director interface doesn't give us a great way to see what that load on the switch is. There are some tools that we have that we can go onto the server and run a report. And Brightmetrics, for those of you that have Brightmetrics, also has a report that can show us what the resource utilization is on the switches and let us know if we're kind of getting over the limit or near the limit on that. And that's something we can definitely help out with. But just be aware, if you do have a lot of pickup groups and hunt groups, you might want to distribute those across your voice switches to limit the load there. And then again, the extension list. So who are members of this pickup group? And so, like I said, this link is going to take us back to the exact same list of extension lists that we were looking at before, because the extension lists are universal and can be applied to various places within the call center or within the phone system. Page groups, pickup groups. I know auto attendant, dial by name directory can reference an extension list, and there's a few others too. And again, real easy to put people in and out of the pickup group. So once we have the pickup group created and we want to actually use it, like we said, we've got, here we've got 5 people in this pickup group. We all work together and we want to be able to grab each other's calls. When a call comes in and I hear it ringing on my coworker's phone, I can reach over to my phone. All of the phones, all the Mitel IP phones have a soft key on them that says pickup. So I can dial that button that says pickup and then the pickup group extension. That's one way. So in this case, we're talking about the training pickup group, so extension 1924, and that'll bring that call to me. I can also create a button on the phone So to take a look at that, we can go up here to users, programmable buttons, and I can grab any phone in the list here. Again, we got Brian first in the list, and I can grab one of the buttons on his phone. You do need to be aware when you're configuring buttons, what kind of phone do they have? Do they have one of the IP230 phones? That's a phone that's been out for many, many years, has 3 programmable, well, really only 2 programmable buttons on it. It has 3 buttons for call appearances. You can use 2 of them for programmable features because you always have to have, at the very minimum, 1 to be able to answer and interact with your telephone calls. I usually recommend on most phones you leave at least 2 available, so they can toggle between a couple of different calls, put a call on hold, grab the next line, and so on. But maybe they've got a 6-button phone like our 560s, a 480s, an 8-button phone. So you do need to know what kind of phone they have before you start choosing where you want to place these buttons on their phone. I'm going to go ahead and grab button 8 here on this phone. We can go for the function group pickup, and I can type in the extension. I think it was 1924. We can give it a label here, pick up, and save that. And now that gives him a one-touch way of being able to pick up that call. And there it fills in the name for us. So if you know the extension, you can also type in the name and let the search sort that out for you. But you can see that you do have the right extension there because it fills in the name for you, or vice versa after you save it. And so now we've got a button, one touch, they can grab calls that are ringing for members of that pickup group. All right, so that's pickup groups. The very next kind of group I want to go into is hunt groups. So hunt groups are a very commonly used feature in the Mitel system. Again, buried here under call control and hunt groups. Of course, you can always use the search to find them. Hunt groups are our most basic way of taking an inbound call and distributing it to a group or a team of people to answer that call. You can there's not a lot of reporting available for hunt groups, so it's really for kind of casual or simple call flows where you don't need to have that kind of either reporting or any sort of sophisticated call queuing. The schedules are somewhat limited as well. As you'll see here, we only have options. We can send it to the same destination if it's off hours or holiday. Other things, we can actually do different things based on whether it's not off hours and holiday, but off hours or holiday. We can do different options. So the options here are a little bit simpler than they are with work groups, which we'll get to next. If you're a member of a work group, you're always a member of that work group. There's no login, log out features. Like I said, just real simple, casual call distribution group here. As I mentioned before, these do live on a phone switch or an appliance. So if you've got the ST100s in your system, or virtual phone switches, or SG model switches, that's where this is going to live. And you need to be aware again that the more hunt groups you put on a switch, kind of the heavier the load is on the switch. And if you kind of load things up too much, there's really nothing that stops you from doing it. It's just that you might start to see some erratic behavior if you overload the equipment. So it's important to pay attention to that. They do give us a column here, which I like, to actually see what switch all these hunt groups are on. So you can kind of see if they're being somewhat evenly distributed or not. In our case, we just have one phone switch, so there's no distribution needed, and we're not making that heavy a usage of them. Some of the limits to keep in mind: if you have the older SG generation switches, those are the orange faced physical appliances. You can have a maximum of 8 hunt groups on a switch with up to 16 extensions, hunt group extensions assigned to groups across that switch. So not a whole lot there. If you have the ST, which is the newer model switches, or the virtual switches, which those are the blue-faced switches. There were a few as they were making the color change there. There's a few orange-faced ST switches, but for the most part, they're blue physical switches. You can have up to 24 hunt groups, but still they want you to limit on the ST switches to 16 hunt group members. And that's also the limit if you're doing simultaneous ringing. It'll let you put over 16 members into a hunt group, but only if it's a top-down ring. If it's simultaneous ring, it'll actually prevent you from being able to save that because it's just a limit of the system to be able to ring 16 extensions simultaneously. So again, everything else has a name and an extension, as we've said before. Here you have a backup extension. So a backup extension is if for some reason this hunt group is unreachable. Oh, excuse me here, something logged out here. Let me get back in here. Oh. We'll go back to our wrench. Features, call control, hunt groups. Take a look at this one here. I'm going to go ahead and hit this little window to expand the details so we can go through this and see it all in one page. So the backup extension for a hunt group is where you want that to go if the hunt group can't be reached. So let's say we have an incoming phone call and the DID is pointed directly to this hunt group, but that trunk switch can't reach the switch hosting the hunt group. So maybe there's a WAN link down, or maybe the physical switch itself is offline. We can send it to a backup extension. So it's kind of important to think about if you're trying to build some resiliency into the system. A hunt group, another hunt group on the same switch is probably not going to be very effective because that's probably also going to be offline in that scenario. A telephone extension hosted by a telephone on the same switch also may not be the best option. You could send it back to an auto attendant potentially that lives on a Windows server, something that's not on the switch, or something at a different site. So like if you've got your trunks coming into site A and you send it to a hunt group that lives on a switch at site B, maybe the backup extension could be a hunt group that's at site A, right? Because maybe it's a WAN link failure you're trying to protect from. So just something to be aware of for the backup extension. If the hunt group can't be reached, which basically means the switch is offline, where's that call going to go? You can right here map a DID directly from this page. So I can click on this and I can choose, one of my DID ranges and give this an available DID. If I want to map a number straight to the hunt group, I can do that. Again, same checkboxes we talked about before. If I want it in the auto attendance dial by name directory, and then also if I want to make it visible to my users in their Mitel Connect client. That's what those two checkboxes do for us. Another thing that affects the load on the switches is the call stack depth. What the call stack depth for a hunt group means is how many calls can simultaneously be ringing to this hunt group. So if a call comes into the hunt group and then it's immediately answered by the first member of the hunt group, then that is no longer part of the current call stack of a hunt group because it has cleared the hunt group. Even though the call is still live and that person is talking to the caller, the call has flowed through the hunt group and is no longer counted as part of the call stack of the hunt group. But if calls come in and start ringing, and then another call comes in and starts ringing, and another call comes in and starts ringing before the very first call gets answered, that's where we start to increase our call stack depth. And so the higher you set that, again, that managing that higher call stack depth can add a little bit of load to the switch. And so you want to try to make that as a realistic number. 8 by default typically seems like a lot. 8 simultaneous calls coming into a hunt group would be a lot, since these are primarily used for casual, usually smaller groups. 8 simultaneous calls would be quite a bit. So we usually recommend to set that down to 4, maybe 2, depending on the type of group, if it's only a few people. Distribution pattern for a hunt group doesn't have a lot of options here. We can go top down or simultaneous. Simultaneous, of course, rings all the phones at once. Top down always starts at the top of the list of members and goes through. So that means that first person is always going to get the bulk of the calls. I have seen that sometimes used in a kind of receptionist scenario where you've got a primary receptionist, and if she doesn't take the call, then there's another person whose role is not primarily as a receptionist, can back them up. But usually simultaneous is kind of the fairest distribution for the hunt group calls. The rings per member and no answer number of rings, you do need to think about those in conjunction with the distribution pattern. If it's simultaneous, these typically want to match. You're going to ring each person in the group 3 times, and then if it doesn't get answered, the no answer number of rings is set to 3, and we're going to move to our no answer destination down here. If you're doing top down, then you really need to do a little bit of math here and figure out how many people are in this hunt group and how many rings am I going to send to each person, and then how many rings total is that going to be before we've given everyone a chance to answer that call. So if we have 3 people in the hunt group and we ring each of them 3 times, we're going to set the no answer number of rings to 9 so that each person actually has a chance to answer that call before we go to the no answer destination and send that call to the next, to the next place, either to a voicemail, to an auto attendant. In this case, we're sending it to an IRN, which if you have contact center, that's one of the entry points to get a call into our contact center queues, is where we have that set to for this particular hunt group. But like I said, just keep in mind whether you're doing top down or simultaneous affects what you might want to put for the rings per member and no answer number of rings. The call member when forwarding all calls, what this does is, let's say they've gone into their call handling modes and they've set up their out of office to forward calls to their cell phone or maybe to someone else in their office, and they put their phone in out of office. If you check this box, their phone, even the one that's forwarded, is still going to ring when a call comes into that hunt group and it's their turn for that call. It's still going to ring their phone. It's not going to ring the forwarding destination. It's actually going to ring that phone that is currently set to maybe out of office or whatever. The other option here we have is to skip member if already on call. So if one of your members of this group is on the phone and a call comes into the hunt group, by default it's going to show up as a second call appearance on their phone, and they'll have an option to ask the first call to hold and answer it. But we can check that box so that they don't even get alerted that there's a call coming into the hunt group, and we can let the other people in the hunt group take care of that. And then of course our call forward destination. So call stack full, like we said, simultaneous calls coming into the hunt group. More than 4, we're going to dispatch the rest somewhere else. No answer, based on our no answer number of rings, where are we going to send it? And then we can apply a schedule to the hunt group. And if we do that, if we say, our on-hour schedule applies here, when we're outside of that, we're going to send it to the off-hours destination. And we can also apply our holiday schedule here. And when it's outside of that, we're also going to send it to the same destination. And then we can also see down here, grayed out, this isn't a setting, it's just a visual, lets us know that it's currently on hours. If you have no schedule applied, so I'm going to hit reset to wipe out the changes I've done on this page. If there's no schedule applied, it's always on hours, but it'll show you live there if the on hours schedule is in effect, or if it's gone into off hours if you do have a schedule on there. One other interesting thing about a hunt group that you can do that affects the where the calls are going to go is there's a feature called make a hunt group busy. If for some reason you need to be able to intervene on the fly and change the routing for the hunt group, you can make the hunt group busy. So a couple different ways you can do that is you can actually dial if the user has the appropriate permissions, which comes into their user group permissions. They can make the hunt group busy by picking up their phone and dialing *18 and then the extension of the hunt group. And the system will read back a message to them that says, the hunt group has been made busy. And if the hunt group has been made busy, it's going to go to the call stack full destination, because busy, full kind of means the same thing. And so that's what happens when you make a hunt group busy. And like I said, you can do that from the phone. You can also do that from Director as an admin. If we come over here to the maintenance section and we go to our appliances, so under status and maintenance, appliances, we have to know what appliance the hunt group lives on. In this case, it's on our vPhone switch. We can take a look at the status page, and we can see here's all the hunt groups that live on the switch. And I can select one of these hunt groups here, and I can make the hunt group busy from here as well. It's asking me if I'm sure I want to do that. Yes, I do. Give that a second to apply, and we'll come back to that page. And now we can see that the hunt group has been made busy, which means any calls that go to this hunt group are going to go to that call stack full destination. And again, it can be made not busy. Same thing, we can come up here and we can make the hunt group normal, or we can call in through our phone, hit star 18 and dial the hunt group extension, and it'll say the hunt group has been made not busy. And then it'll start taking calls normally again. So that's it for hunt groups. Next, we have our more advanced work groups. So work groups, that's a group of agents that, again, receive incoming calls like hunt groups do. But now we start to get into what's referred to as automatic call distribution and call queuing, because we can actually let these calls kind of stack up and wait for an available agent. We have better reporting with work groups through the built-in reporting and also through Brightmetrics call reporting. Like I said, we can queue the calls, we can play comfort messages to people while they're waiting. We appreciate your call, someone will be with you shortly, those sort of messages. And so let's go ahead and take a look at the settings on a work group. So again, everything else, name, extension, backup extension. Again, backup extensions when you're dealing with a work group. Work groups live on the servers in our system, not the switches. And so that's something to take into account, again, when we're building resiliency into the system. The backup extension for a work group wouldn't make any sense to be a work group on the same server, because if this work group's not available, the work groups on the same server are also not going to be available. Maybe it makes sense to set the backup extension to a hunt group. So in a lot of cases, people want the benefits of the call queuing, the login, log out, the better reporting. But if for some reason the server's down, we can set up a hunt group with the same members, and we can set that as the backup destination for this work group. And so that'll give us some resiliency into the system. You could, if you have multiple servers, you could put one work group, and then you could actually set the backup destination. So you have a work group that lives on server A, you have another kind of mirror image of that work group that lives on server B, and you can have the work group on server B back up the work group on server A. Now the guideline on that is to actually still use a hunt group in between. So we'd kind of use a hunt group just to pass that call through, and we'd set the hunt group to always send calls to work group B, and set it actually as the backup destination of work group A. And that's just because both of these extensions live on a server and they both have voicemail. There's a feature in the Mitel system that if you try to forward an extension from extension A to extension B and they both have voicemail, the next time you try to forward that call, it's actually going to pull back to the voicemail for the first extension. And that's just a feature of the way the Mitel voicemail system works. But putting a hunt group in between those two entities kind of breaks that process and allows the call to flow through the way you would expect. And of course, when you want to build some resiliency into the system, like I said, there's a lot of different things to consider, and so we can definitely help you out with that. All right, so that's the backup extension. Again, our checkboxes for the dial by name directory, and make extension private from our Connect client directory. User group, that's going to control some things when we get to the forwarding of the work group and whether or not it can forward to external numbers, that sort of thing, if we want to actually forward the call out somewhere else. What server it lives on. Language features, so there are some automatic prompts, and if your system is built with multi-language support, you might have work group queues for different languages, and we can play some of the prompts in queue, such as there's one that announces your estimated wait time in queue, and we can play that in the appropriate language if your system is licensed for additional languages. Work groups, as I mentioned, can have a mailbox. So actually, quite often we use work groups not as a call distribution mechanism with call queuing. Sometimes we create work groups just for the mailbox feature because it's a nice way to create a mailbox that we can then add multiple people to, and they can actually see that message from their Mitel Connect client. Everyone in the group can see that message, and whoever responds to that message first kind of takes care of it for the group, and the group has shared visibility there, so you only have one person that needs to respond. And so a lot of times we will use work groups just for that. Or maybe it's the final destination of this work group if no one's able to answer the call. On this page, we do have the option here to record the work group name. Now, this is just the name. So this is if we don't record a full greeting, the system is going to use kind of its canned voice to say, you've reached the voicemail for, and then it's going to insert the recorded name, not a full greeting. We would do that on a different page. And also, if you forward messages from the work group to other people's extension, they're going to hear, and when they check their voicemail, you've received a forwarded message from, and it's going to play this work group name recording. Another option here that affects how our agents interact here is enable automatic agent logout on ring no answer. So if a call comes to the work group and you've got an agent whose phone rings and they don't answer it, maybe they've stepped away and they have forgotten to log out of the work group, they've gone to lunch or whatever, rather than continue to send calls to them, we can just automatically log them out. So when they come back from lunch, they'll see that and they'll log back in. And again, we can see that based on this current schedules, which is actually going to be on the next tab, this work group is currently operating in on hours mode because there's either no schedule applied, which is the case, or the schedule is currently on hours. And so here we can see on the call routing tab what happens to calls that hit this work group. The distribution pattern for our agents. We have a few more options than we have with hunt groups. We still have top down and we still have simultaneous, but we also have round robin. And so round robin essentially is if a call comes in, it's going to try the first agent. If they answer the call, great. Next call comes in, it's going to go to agent 2 and give them a chance to answer the call and start ringing through. Maybe agent 2 doesn't answer it, but agent 3 does. Next call comes in, it's going to start with agent 4 and kind of keep going around the group that way. And then longest idle, that's one that's commonly used in call center, creates a pretty fair distribution of the calls because it looks at kind of the talk time that they've spent on the phone and tries to even that out amongst the agents so that they're all spending about the same amount of time talking on the phone. And so that one's pretty common to use with work groups. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to skip down to the call forward after and rings per agent. So what happens when a call comes into the work group, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to, in this case, we're going to try to find who our longest idle agent is, and we're going to give them the opportunity to answer that call, and we're going to give them 2 rings. And we have forward after 4 rings. So we're going to take a look here for about 4 rings. We're going to see if there's an agent available and ring them if they're idle. And if they don't answer the call, we're going to move on to the second agent and we're going to ring them a couple times. And then if it still doesn't get answered, right, so no answer, then we're going to queue the call. So then we're going to place it into our queue, which we've got a queue handling tab we'll get to here. And we're going to continue to hold on to that call and look for an agent that's available to take it. We have an option here if all of our agents are logged out. We can either forward the call somewhere else or queue it. I would suggest we probably want to forward it somewhere else because if everyone's logged out, queuing it is probably not going to help that caller out. If everyone is busy, we're also going to queue the call. So all of our agents are busy. Go ahead and queue it. That makes sense. Always, we're only going to use if we're not really using the call queuing or call distribution methods for the work group. If we're only using this work group as a voicemail box, that's when we would come up here and select always, and we would forward to voicemail. But if we're actually going to use this as a call group, as a calling group to distribute calls, then we're going to say no answer busy and typically we're going to set these to queue, and then we're going to get into our queue handling. You know, off hours typically, in that case, you are probably just going to always go to voicemail, and here's where we can record that off hours voicemail greeting. You know, thank you for calling the sales team. You know, our normal business hours are whatever. Please leave us a message. We'll get back to you in the morning. That sort of thing. Of course, you can have a holiday message, custom schedules. We've done some other webinars that have gotten into schedules quite a bit. But I'm going to go back here, and we're going to skip over here to queue handling. So that call's come in, we've looked for an agent, no agent got that call, so we're going to drop it into the queue. We have 5 different steps that we can do here during the queue handling while the call is waiting. First couple of settings here actually apply to the Connect client and to the agents who are operating in that work group. We can actually give them a warning, a little alert pop up in the client when there's more than 3 calls waiting. In this case, we've got it set to 3, so we kind of want to let them know, hey, you know, maybe you want to wrap up those calls faster. Maybe you want to come out of your wrap-up state if that's what you're in, or log back into the queue. And then if calls are waiting over 30 seconds, again, we can give an alert on that. We can allow agents to view the calls in the queue in the Connect client and grab calls directly from the queue. But as far as the experience for our inbound caller, we've got these different steps here that we go through. We can, by default, they're all set to skip. So if we want to do something here, we can uncheck skip this step, and we can do something here, right? So we can choose, do we want to announce the estimated wait time? The system looks at the previous calls, how long they waited, how many calls are currently waiting, how many agents are logged in and taking calls, and it does some math based on that information, and it comes up with an estimated wait time, and it'll play that information to the caller so they know, you know, what they're in for. This part operates just like an auto attendant. The text field here is just for reference purposes. It doesn't do any speech or text to speech. So you can type in here what it says, or you can type in notes about what, you know, what this step is supposed to be doing, so that, you know, another administrator can have some breadcrumbs. You can use this for various purposes like that. We can record a greeting here, or record a message, an in-queue message, or a comfort message, sometimes they're called. We can say, thank you for calling. All of our agents are currently on the phone. You know, please stand by and we'll be right with you. Of course, you can import a greeting if you have the WAV file in the right format to import. The preferences button here, if you've worked with auto attendants, those sort of things, you understand you got to set what extension or external phone number that you're going to make those recordings from. If you're using the record button. And then we can actually give them options while they're waiting. We can say, you know, thank you for calling. All of our agents are currently tied up. If you'd like to leave us a message, you know, we could take a message, and that'll just drop this call into the voicemail box for the work group. You know, if you'd like to speak to, you know, somebody else, we can transfer the call to another extension. Yeah, those are kind of really the only options that I could see you giving to someone while they're waiting in a work group queue. But those are the things that we can do here. So we can record a message, we can choose whether or not to announce the estimated wait time, and then time until the next step. So we're going to play them the call, the music on hold. After we've played this message, we're going to play whatever message is recorded here, and then 60 seconds of music, and then we're going to move to step 2. And in this case, step 2, we've got it set to skip this step, which that is the default. So what happens by default is the call skips. This one also skips. This one also skips. Step 5 is grayed out. You can't skip step 5 because it's the last step, and we've got to do something with this call. So in this case, we set step 1 for 60 seconds. 60 seconds of music is going to play, and we're going to jump over to step 5. Again, do we want to announce that estimated wait time again? Let them know if they've gotten any closer to the front of the line. Again, we can give them some options, maybe leave a voicemail or whatever. And then if we want to kind of send this call somewhere else and kind of give up on it, we can set the overflow interflow down here to an extension or an external phone number. You can set it to a mailbox so that it can leave a voicemail. You could set it to an external number if you need to. You can also set it to another work group, and that's where this maintain wait time check mark comes into play. If you set it to another work group, maybe you have another kind of higher tier work group behind this one. If you don't select this box, they're going to come into that work group and their wait time is going to start over at 0. So it means they're kind of the newest person in the queue for that second work group. So they're kind of in the back of the line. If you select the option to maintain wait time, then whatever time they've waited so far, which we've got maybe 60, another 60, 120 seconds or so, that wait time is going to carry over with them to the second work group we send them to. And so if we're answering the calls, in the order they were received, this call is already going to have that time in there, and it's going to be ahead of calls that maybe just came into that other work group. And then also for reporting purposes, it's also going to show the true wait time of that call. So that's kind of important if you're tracking the wait time of your calls. So those are our queue handling steps. Of course, going back to members, if we're talking about a work group that's taking calls, we got to have some members in the work group. So like everything else, it's real easy to take people and move them into the work group or out of the work group. We can also select people here as an admin, and we can choose whether to log them into the work group, log them out of the work group, or put them in wrap up, which is they're logged in, but they're not taking calls when they're in wrap up. Wrap up is a feature that call centers have and work groups have, where typically the way that works is at the end of a call, you're automatically placed into wrap up, which kind of gives that agent an opportunity to take their breath, maybe finish some notes up depending on what they need to do, what the workflow is, and get ready for the next call. So we can choose to give them a little bit of wrap up time. But with our members here, we do have members. You do have to think about the order the members are, whether we're talking about work groups or hunt groups. If we've got multiple members here and we're doing either the top down or the round robin call distribution pattern, we can come in here and we can adjust what order they're in. Maybe we want, Steve, if we're doing top down, to always get first shot at these calls. And then if he's not available, it'll roll down here through Mike and then Brittany in this case. But we can move people, up and down in here as needed. And this only really applies, again, if we're using top down or round robin call distribution. Voicemail tab, this, like we said, it does have a voicemail box, so therefore it has a voicemail password. Anything that has a voicemail box, we have a choice whether to accept broadcast messages. Not a lot of people using that feature. That's a feature where someone can record a message on their phone and send it to every mailbox in the system. Do you want this to receive those type of messages? We do have email delivery for these. So, if you want to send this to maybe a supervisor for the group or something like that, somebody responsible for being alerted and checking these messages, we can send an alert, either just a text-based email that lets them know there's a message there, or we can even attach the WAV file, just like we can with a personal mailbox. Whether or not we mark the message as heard once we send the email. Sending an email with when the mailbox is full, that's always a good idea, especially for a work group versus a personal mailbox, because maybe people are getting the email and they're listening to the WAV file and they're responding, but they never go back and actually delete the message. Eventually that mailbox can fill up. And so getting an alert when the mailbox is full is a good idea. Automatic message forwarding, so a little bit different than the email forwarding. Automatic message forwarding is just taking that voicemail and dropping it into another mailbox on the system. So maybe these should all go to, Steve's mailbox rather than sit here in the work group mailbox. So I can put my extension in here, I can save it, and anytime a message is left in this work group mailbox, it is also going to be copied over to my mailbox. And then the other option you have here is to delete the message after forwarding. So if I don't want to have two copies of that voicemail, one in the work group mailbox and one in my mailbox, I can check the box to delete the message after forwarding, which means it'll only be in this destination mailbox, not in the work group mailbox any longer. And of course, anything with voicemail has escalation profiles. We have done some other webinars talking about making use of escalation profiles for personal mailboxes. Every user in the system that has a mailbox has access to these escalation profiles where you can start sending emails, start making phone calls, alerting multiple people until the message is checked. Maybe if you have a workgroup mailbox set up as some sort of like emergency support mailbox, you could make use of this feature to start alerting multiple people about that. And so that's basically just about everything that workgroups can do for us. I see we are coming up on the end of the hour. So quickly, I will jump over here to users and user groups. So that's another thing that when people say someone needs to be a member of, some particular group, we need to distinguish if they're talking about, a call distribution group like a work group or a hunt group, a page group, a pickup group, or maybe they're talking about a user group. User groups primarily affect the telephone's permissions or the user's permissions. What can they do with their phone? So if we look at, I'm going to look at our test user group here, and it has a class of service telephony called allow monitor whisper barge. If we go and view that class of service here, we can see here's all the things that that person is allowed to do with their phone. They're allowed to do call pickups. So again, with those pickup groups we looked at earlier, they have to have the permission to use that feature as well as be a member of the pickup group. Things like trunk-to-trunk transfer, which is taking an inbound call from the outside and sending it to another outside phone number. That's a permission because again, there's a chance for toll fraud there, so that's why there's a permission based on that. Paging groups we looked at. So again, if we want to create those page groups, if we want people to be able to use them, they have to have permission to access those page groups. Lots of different permissions. We have done a deep dive on all the different settings in the user groups, which you can find up on our YouTube channel. I won't go through all of them right now, but again, back to our user groups. So we were looking at the telephony permissions. We also have the call permissions that go into a user group. So that's kind of who can they call? Can they call long distance? Can they call internal only? So like for those lobby phones, you can lock them down that way. Or maybe no restrictions at all. Maybe they need to make international calls, that sort of thing. And then mailbox permissions. You can set, maybe these extensions over here in the call center, they don't really get a lot of voicemail, but that we want them to have a voicemail box, but we don't want them stacking up, 50, 60, 70 messages. So we drop them down to a small mailbox and only let them have, 10 and then make them keep those clean. That's some of the things you can do with the user group permissions. Also with the user group permissions, if I push this up so we can take a look at let's go ahead and focus on our test user group again. And I'm going to select this button over here to expand the details so I can get a good view of this test user group. In addition to the 3 types of class of services we looked at, we've got some settings here that affect the CESID, that's the caller's emergency service identification number, or the caller ID that the 911 operator is going to see when they call, and that's going to determine the location. So again, that's something to be aware of and that we can definitely help you out with making sure you've got your system configured properly for that. But user groups play a role there. And also the music on hold. So maybe you have different divisions that want to have different music on hold for different users. The user group can control that. And then finally here, the trunk groups that user has access to. So if you have multiple locations, maybe you have PRI trunk groups, you have SIP trunk groups, you can choose what trunk groups are available to that user group. So again, that comes in handy if you're either multi-site or maybe you're testing multiple trunk groups, or again, operating multiple divisions within the company that need to have access to different trunk groups. That's another use case for that. And aside from user groups, trunk groups down here are basically the last type of groups we have to contend with the Mitel system. But you're never going to put necessarily a user in a trunk group. You're going to put a user in a user group, right, that has access to a trunk group. And so that's kind of how that comes into play. And that's all the different types of groups that we have within the Mitel Connect system. Hopefully that gives you some new information to work with. And again, if you need any help with any of these items that we've talked about, or you need to go further with that, feel free to reach out to us. And looks like we have just a couple minutes left. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to help anybody out.
Fantastic, Steve. Thank you. And like Steve was saying earlier, we do have a deeper dive into most of these groups already up on our YouTube channel. So if you do have a question or anything, I'm happy to send over the direct link to those. Or if you're looking for anything in particular, we're also always looking for ideas for these webinars. So don't hesitate when I send out the recording to everybody that's registered. You can go ahead and send in the emails asking us, for something that you want to look at. And when Robert reaches out to you on a biweekly basis as well, you can let him know, hey, I'm curious about this one feature. Can you have Steve or Mike show that in one of the next webinars? So still no questions in, so I think we can go ahead and wrap it up. Again, always a pleasure, Steve. And we look forward to seeing you guys next month.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.